BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Thursday, another Dahlia Thursday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Thursdays, I talk to you guys about the Black Dahlia murder, one of the most horrific crimes in American history. And in this episode, I will be responding to Bailey Sarian's video on the Black Dahlia, as well as looking at another one from True Crime Lovers. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Black Dahlia. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Now, as many of you know, I am always coming to you from West Virginia at heart, but I have been in the Philippines, and we had a super typhoon that came in last week that took out all the power for the city, and it was slowly being restored, and today is the first day that we've had power back in my home, and I'm just glad to sit here with the lights on, as opposed to illuminating the room with a glow stick, which was what I was doing from time to time, minus some of the days when I was out of the house. So it is a good feeling, and I'm hoping that things will be back to normal. And I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, mostly talking about true crime news, serial killers, but any subject under the sun or in the darkness is fair game, and I'm hoping that everything will be back on schedule. Now, as far as today's episode is going to go, I'm actually going to begin by discussing the video from True Crime Lovers. I had a different subject planned for Dahlia Thursday, but because I've started watching a lot of content about the Black Dahlia on YouTube, I get recommended videos, and there were two of them that caught my eye, and you might say distracted me a little bit. One was from Bailey Sarian, and one was from True Crime Lovers. And I'm actually just going to play this clip, and then I'm going to have a response. Once again, this is from the channel True Crime
Solved
Lovers.
Murders in American History. The Soden House, built in the 1920s, is a striking building in Los Angeles with a design inspired by Mayan temples. It's known for its unusual shape, secret passageways, and an eerie reputation that has lasted for decades. The house's link to the Black Dahlia case begins with Dr. George Hodel, a well-known doctor who lived there from 1945 to 1950. Hodel was a controversial figure, accused of many crimes, including sexual assault and incest. His son, Steve Hodel, who was a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, believed his father was responsible for Elizabeth Short's murder, which happened in 1946. Steve Hodel's theory is that some of the brutal killings, including the Black Dahlia, may have taken place in the basement of the Soden house. He claims that his father had a motive and opportunity, and he points to evidence he uncovered over the years. Steve even wrote a book called Black Dahlia Avenger, where he details his suspicions and the evidence he believes supports his case. The house itself adds to the mystery. It was designed by Lloyd Wright, the son of the famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright. The building's layout is unusual, with hidden rooms and secret tunnels that many say could hide dark secrets. After the Black Dahlia murder, the district attorney's office reportedly bugged the house, and recordings captured strange sounds. Some say they heard a woman being assaulted and digging noises from the basement. There's also a recorded phone call where George Hodel allegedly makes a chilling remarking, hinting that he might have killed Elizabeth Short but that there was no proof. Despite all this, no formal charges were ever filed against Hodel, and the case remains officially unsolved. The connection between the Soden house and the Black Dahlia is mostly based on Steve Hodel's investigations, police transcripts, and family stories, rather than solid forensic evidence. From a true crime point of view, the Soden house is a key piece of the puzzle. Its architecture, the recorded sounds, and the suspect's history make it a location that many believe could hold clues. Still, without concrete proof, the house's role stays in the realm of speculation. It's a place that fuels the mystery and keeps the story of the Black Dahlia alive, even after all these years.
And one more time, that was from the channel True Crime Lovers. it's not a very popular channel or video, and it seems like that one did not get a whole lot of views at the time of this recording. But one thing that I've been doing on Black Box Online Radio lately is combating AI slop. Now, I don't know if there's a person that is overseeing the content of that channel. It seems that some of these AI generated videos with a computer voice are literally just people taking a pre-generated script with pre-generated images, making a pre-generated video, and putting them online. They are packaged, but no one is evaluating the content. I'm not completely sure with this one, but there's definitely a computer voice there. But one thing that you can really tell is the script may have been completely pre-written by a computer program, and I'm saying that it probably was. I don't know it 100% because I don't know who runs that channel. However, I think that there are certain things that we need to look for when we're listening to videos like these, or if you just happen to click on one by accident. A lot of the language was very jumbled in that video, yet there was one sentence that really stood out to me when it's talking about a particular Black Dahlia suspect named George Hodel. And it's saying that the majority of the evidence against George Hodel, actually labeling him as the Black Dahlia Avenger, the murderer of Elizabeth Short, comes from his son, Steve Hodel, not from the authorities. George Hodel was a real suspect in the Black Dahlia case. He was put under police surveillance for 5 weeks, and they weren't able to find anything. And Steve Hodel has really been the person who is pushing that narrative in the 21st century. But then that video immediately went to a different part of the story, saying the Sowden house is an essential part of the story. It's a key piece of the puzzle. And I'm just hearing something that is extremely disconnected. I'm hearing something that doesn't sound like it belongs together at all. Most of the investigation was created by Steve Hodel. Much of the evidence was presented by Steve Hodel, not from the authorities. The Sowden house is an essential part of the puzzle. And I'm just saying, whoa, this stuff sounds very disconnected. And that is a clue that it's somewhat of a pre-generated script. Now, I don't know about all the involvement in that video, but as far as talking about the house where George Hodel was living and operating at the time of the Black Dahlia crime, I think that this is something that has really helped advance the narrative. Back in 2019 and 2020, I went down the rabbit hole in regards to the Hodel family. Not the Black Dahlia, but the Hodel family. I did a 2-part podcast series for my Zodiac episodes here on Black Box Online Radio, looking at George Hodel as a Black Dahlia suspect. But then there was a mini-series that came out in 2019 called I Am the Night with India Isley and Chris Pine, and I watched that one, and that's about Fauna Hodel, the, I guess we'll say the granddaughter of George Hodel. Let's just call her that. And the niece of Steve Hodel. And it's also talking about how there are these stories about the Hodel family that are very, very outrageous. The podcast Root of Evil was being promoted at the time. And that's really what I was focused on, the Hodel family, as opposed to the story of Elizabeth Short. And as I've encountered with Dahlia Thursday, most of you guys already know this. The Hodel story and the Dahlia story are completely different. We're dealing with just very, very different themes, very, very different subjects. And furthermore, if you're only looking at one suspect in the Black Dahlia murder, it's going to seem like George Hodel was guilty. I mean, that was my experience, because I was like, talking about the Sowden house, alright, they know which room he did it in the house. I mean, it was that room in the basement. They know how he transported her body with the cement bags or the concrete bags to the crime scene. The entire narrative was laid out by Steve Hodel. And in 2019 and 2020, I was mostly under the spell and thinking, you know what? He probably was the Black Dahlia Avenger. However, as we're going to see very early on, that a lot of these things are disconnected. And if you have any takeaway at all from true crime lovers, it's that the cases against George Hodel has really been promulgated by Steve Hodel in the 21st century. Not any of the authorities, maybe Stephen Kay, the prosecutor from the district attorney's office for a while, but as I understand, he has since backtracked from that. And Steve Hodel is pushing a suspect just like anybody else. George Hodel is just one of the suspects in the Black Dahlia case. Some people still try to make a case for Leslie Dillon, other people still try to make a case for Carl Balsiger, and other people have their own suspects in the Black Dahlia mystery. So it really is not an open and shut issue in regards to George Hodel. If you have any comments about that video about the Sowden House from True Crime Lovers, I would love to read them. And now I'm going to switch gears and talk about Bailey Sarian's Black Dahlia video. It is an older one, but as I said, it was recommended to me. Bailey Sarian is one of the most popular true crime YouTubers out there. At the time of this recording, she has over 8 million subscribers. Her Black Dahlia video is older, and she was just thanking everybody for helping her to reach 3 million subscribers at the time. And for years, I would click on her content, I would watch about 3 minutes, and I would give up, because she did the whole true crime makeup thing. And to her credit, she did it very well in the minds of some people, and she was able to achieve a certain amount of popularity. Again, getting over 8 million subscribers, I do congratulate her on that. But what I don't congratulate her on is the way that she presents the videos. Earlier this year, I did a response to her Zodiac Killer video, which you can find on this channel under the name Zodiac Killer News Report with Bailey Sarian, and that's just discussed at the end very briefly. I actually recorded an entire reaction video that was about 50 minutes long, but I wasn't satisfied with my responses, and to be honest, that was some new territory for me. That video took longer than anything that I've ever made on Black Box Online Radio, and I just had to take it down because I'm not really somebody who does reaction videos, and it didn't come out the way I wanted, let's just say that, but I did discuss her content in an episode called Zodiac Killer News Report with Bailey Sarian, and in this episode I would like to discuss her Black Dahlia video. In both of them, I think that she's going to encounter some things very early on where she is going to really struggle with trying to put out certain pieces of the narrative. And, without further ado, I'm just going to play a clip. It's about 2.5 minutes long, and then we're going to have a discussion.
Police still have 0 suspects, and the community is getting a little impatient. What's taking them so long to solve this murder? I'm feeling unsafe in my community. Because the media was reporting on this case pretty heavily, it led to a lot of people coming forward and actually confessing to killing Elizabeth, but none of them had actual evidence that they did indeed kill her. They were just trying to claim it. Yeah, we need better hobbies, you guys. Look into it. But the Los Angeles Police Department did receive letters from the supposed killer, and they believed this person was indeed the killer, or at least knew who it was, because they were sending some of Elizabeth's personal items to police in the mail. One of these items was Elizabeth's address book, one that she always had with her. Inside her address book, there were pages ripped out, which made police think, maybe on those pages was the information of her killer. By February 5th, 1947, 2 arrests were made for this case. Robert, aka Red, and a man named Dan. They arrested Red again. They got nowhere with it, and they had to let him go. With this man named Dan, he confessed, but later Dan said that he was mentally unwell, and that's why he confessed, but that he really didn't do it. So police are like, dude, this sucks. I mean, I'm sure they didn't say that, but people seem to be confessing left and right, but none of them are actually the killer. And it's just wasting everyone's time and making things more confusing. Another suspect came to the surface. That was an infamous Hollywood doctor to the stars named George Hodel. Hodel? Is it George Hodel? It's George. Friends of George recognized the pictures in the paper of Elizabeth, and they were like, I know that girl. So a tip was given to the police department that Elizabeth was briefly dating George. They were never official, but people remembered seeing her around at George's home where he threw a lot of shady parties. So police look into this George guy and who he is, and they see that he had a pretty shady past. Not even shady. This dude had issues and should have been in prison. This sicko was accused of sexually abusing his daughter, who was only 14 years old. Allegedly, she became pregnant. Well, that's not alleged. Allegedly, he had sexually abused her and then she became pregnant. And then to make things worse, George attempted to perform an abortion on his daughter, but it wasn't successful. It was decided to place the baby up for adoption. Now, I guess that there was this whole trial, but it ended up being acquitted and he was let go. But I know it's I'm not bringing a lot of evidence and proof to this. He was guilty. So
and one more time, that was from Bailey Sarian's channel, and that was her video on the Black Dahlia. Now, as I said, she struggles with the information. Like, she's talking about, oh, this guy, George Hodel or Hodel or something. His name is George, okay? And, he's a suspect in the Black Dahlia mystery. And he was accused of sexual assault. He was accused of sexually assaulting his daughter. And I know he was acquitted, but he did it. That's how she ended that clip right there. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm just sitting back and I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, yeah, this George Hodel guy, whatever his name was, George, right? He did it? Well, how do you know that he did it? I mean, even when I went down the rabbit hole in regards to the Hodel family, I was still thinking, wait a second, he was accused by Tamara Hodel, his daughter, in 1949 of committing crimes against her. But did he actually do it? I mean, he was acquitted. It's possible that he didn't. And one of the things that I've really encountered in the Larry Harnish live streams is that George Hodel was accused of things by his daughter Tamara Hodel, but she was also a very wild storyteller. And one thing I just really didn't connect the dots on is that Tamara Hodel was a proven liar. As a case in point, she had a daughter named Fauna Hodel, and she told Fauna and her adoptive mother that Fauna was African American, that she was half black, that Tamara had had the baby with an African American man. So Fauna Hodel is growing up thinking that she is half black. She carries her birth certificate around, so she has to sit in the colored sections because times were segregated in the 1950s. And she has to just prove to people that she's half black. Then she gets in touch with her mother, Tamar, when she's a teenager, and she's saying, I'm half black, right? And her mother says, oh, no. That was just a story I made up. And then Fauna is just absolutely shocked and devastated. She's been spending her whole life, which was like 15, 16 years at the time, telling people that she's half black, and it was all a lie. So, as a case in point, Tamara Hodel was known to tell wild stories and to make things up. All of this stuff is detailed in the book One Day She'll Darken by Fauna Hodel, and I have a 3-part book discussion on that. As I said, I went down the rabbit hole, but I invite you to listen to some other episodes here on Black Box Online Radio. So, as far as, just he did it, no, he was accused of it, but he was never convicted of it, of these things, and we don't necessarily know. And I really found that Bailey Sarian is somebody who has a very large audience, but because she's talking about new subjects every single week, she doesn't really have the ability to digest the information, and mostly, she seems like the type of person who really struggles with names like this George Hodel guy or whatever his name is. She did that throughout the entire duration of the video. She's referring to the suspect, Red Manley, as this Red Manley guy. The person who found Elizabeth Short's body was just Miss Berzinger. And she seems like somebody who genuinely struggles with that. I think it heavily affects her presentation, but her audience seemed to be just fine with it. And this really is the beginning of her narrative about the Black Dahlia. Firstly, she was talking about how Elizabeth Short was born in Massachusetts. She grew up in Medford, Massachusetts. And then she went to California because she wanted to have the California experience because that's where dreams would come true. That was a statement from Bailey Sarian. But one thing she left out was that Elizabeth Short had asthma, and the Californian climate was actually much more suitable for somebody with asthma than Medford, Massachusetts, dry climate versus a humid climate. And she also talked about how Elizabeth Short went to Vallejo, California, and then she went to San Diego with absolutely no plan and had no idea what she was going to do. All right, I'm thinking that again borders on mind reading. Even if you have found that information somewhere, even if you have read that sentence from Person X that Elizabeth Short went to San Diego with no plan, that doesn't mean that she didn't have a plan. We can differentiate between what's written by somebody else versus what somebody was actually thinking. A more appropriate way of phrasing it would be, it has been claimed by somebody that Elizabeth Short went to San Diego with no plan. Then Bailey Sarian also made the claims that not a lot is known about Elizabeth Short's early life prior to going to California. And I am also thinking that this might be a little bit weak in the research area. I mean, here on Black Box Online Radio's Dahlia Thursday, I have an entire episode on the backstory of Elizabeth Short's life, and I mean, I was mostly discussing a chapter from John Gilmore's book Severed, which is on this very subject. So, again, she has a very popular channel, but it doesn't seem like she has gone into great depths to try and learn the information, digest the information, or even if she's working with a team of writers and researchers, they have also not covered all the bases. And yes, I'm a little bit bothered by this because when I did my Zodiac Killer video in response to Bailey Sarian, it was just like that times 10 because with the Zodiac Killer case, I'm a little bit more familiar with it. I've been talking about the Zodiac Killer here on Black Box Online Radio for 8 years now. The Black Dahlia, 4 months. So you can see a little bit of comparing and contrasting. And there were just all of these assumptions in the Zodiac video, saying things that were not true. You know, there were no good suspects in these crimes. Wait a second. How do you know that? Yes, we do have suspects. We can list them all out. And, you know, I went into detail in the Zodiac Killer news report with Bailey Sarian. But she would say a lot of things that I didn't personally find were very credible. So with the Black Dahlia case, it appears that the same issues are going on. Now, she was also talking about some things, though, in regards to Elizabeth Short's body, and it seems that these are the important things to pay attention to. Elizabeth Short was found surgically bisected, cut through the second and third lumbar vertebrae, and it appeared that she had been placed face down for an extended period of time post-mortem. And this was done to looking at lividity. This was done to look at things in regards to how the blood was pooling and so on. And she also seems to be paying attention to certain things where it means that Elizabeth Short's body was most likely face down for a period of time, transported to the crime scene, then placed face down again, and then turned over into the position where it was found and photographed. All right, so I think that all of that stuff is very important to pay attention to because that means somebody was handling her body during the post-mortem stages extensively. And that also tells me that she was most likely dead for an extended period of time. Also, there was not a lot of blood evidence that was left behind. One detail in the Bailey Sarian video that stood out to me was she said that there was no blood found at the crime scene. But do you remember I told you about that theory involving cement bags? It's my understanding that there were 2 bags that were used for cement mixing, that were found in the vicinity of the dump site, for lack of a better term, and one of them had what appeared to be bloody water in it. Bear in mind, we did not have DNA testing in 1947, so it seemed rather impossible to try and verify if that was her DNA in the bloody water or not, but that is just something that I wanted to throw out. So it's not zero. It's not that there was no blood evidence of any kind or possible blood evidence. It's possible that there was. And she also points out, though, that Elizabeth Short's body was found very close to the sidewalk. And this relates to an ongoing discussion that we've been having here on Dahlia Thursday, where if you look at the crime scene photos, you will see very clearly that Elizabeth Short's body is right next to the sidewalk. And the witness who found Elizabeth Short was named Betty Bersinger. She was pushing her daughter in a pram or stroller, and she was actually going out to a shoe repairman on an errand for her husband. And she saw what appeared to have been a mannequin in the grass, and she took a look at it and then realized that it was a human body. So then she went on to somebody's house, and they called 911, and then the authorities arrived. Now, this is something that is an ongoing discussion because 2 weeks ago on Dahlia Thursday, I was talking to you guys about the book Sisters in Death by Eli Frankel. And one of the key bombshells in that book is that Eli Frankel claims that he has uncovered a secret piece of information, and that is that Elizabeth Short's body was not left right against the sidewalk. It was left 12 to 16 feet from the sidewalk in the weeds. And his source for this is Betty Bersinger herself. He claims that Betty Bersinger, got her on the phone and was able to interview her, and she claims that she has been consistent about this the entire time, which is very few people have asked her, what was it like when you found the body of Elizabeth Short? Eli Frankel has also been claiming that there was a secret key piece of information, a key question that the authorities wanted to have to try and identify the real Black Dahlia Avenger, and Eli Frankel thinks that he's identified it, and that was that the body of Elizabeth Short was moved from the weeds to the sidewalk, because last week on Dahlia Thursday, I had Denise Diana Huddle on the program. She is the author of the book Anthrax to Zodiac, and she was saying something that is a reasonable statement. She's like, you hear the story from Betty Bersinger that she's walking down the sidewalk and she saw what she thought was a mannequin next to the sidewalk, but it was actually Elizabeth Short's body. And she was thinking, well, how on earth could you mistake that for a mannequin? Clearly that's a human being, and clearly that person had been alive at one point. That was a deceased human that was right next to the sidewalk. Well, if Eli Frankel's whole hypothesis is correct, that would mean that her body was actually in the weeds, and then somebody moved it before she was photographed, before the crime scene photographs were taken. And that's quite possible. Some people were responding to my episode and saying, what are you talking about? Clearly the body was right next to the sidewalk. Anybody can see that. And you can. You can go to Google and you can look at the crime scene photos right now. I don't share them here on YouTube, the close-ups anyway, but that is the overall discovery that Eli Frankel is trying to propose. Now, it doesn't appear that it's 100% certifiable, but this is a new development that is happening, and that we should always be aware of, that this might be the key piece of information in the story. And everything does start to make a little bit more sense in that context. Okay, though, so we have this narrative about how Elizabeth Short has gone to California. She goes from Northern California to Southern California, and she ends up murdered. Bailey Sarian was going through the suspects, and she came across an individual named Red Manley, as she called him, but this, of course, would be Red Manley, someone whom Elizabeth Short spent time with in Southern California. And she talks about how Red Manley was arrested by the police, he was accosted by the police, he was confronted by the police, he was interrogated by the police, and Bailey said that the investigation went nowhere. It didn't go anywhere. And I'm just thinking, well, that's probably because Red Manley didn't do it. I have an entire standalone episode about Red Manley here on this channel where, well, most of it discusses Red Manley. That's most likely because he didn't do it. And this was some of the stuff that I was actually thinking about discussing for Dahlia Thursday, because you guys know that I've been reading the book Black Dahlia, Red Rose by Pugh Eatwell, and in that book, she tells the story of Red Manley interacting with Elizabeth Short, and more or less, he claims that she refused to do anything physical with him. She actually didn't seem like she liked to do things with men in a physical way. Instead, he says all they did was spend time together and drive around. And Red Manley was heavily pressed and interrogated by this, and his story didn't change. They spent time together, they drove around, and it seems like Elizabeth Short was doing this to a lot of people. And one thing where I think Denise Diana Huddle is correct is that Elizabeth Short was living a high-risk lifestyle, putting herself in contact with strangers, in the company of strangers, people that she didn't know that well, and going to odd places. That is something where she actually would have been, in a very, very serious risk of something bad happening to her. But the thing is, we don't know exactly what happened with Elizabeth Short between January 9th of 1947 and January 14th of 1947. Whatever happened there is still part of the mystery. But the other points that Bailey Sarian was really trying to pay attention to is that there were other murders that happened in the country that were somewhat similar to the Black Dahlia murder, and I was really surprised that such a high-profile YouTuber like Bailey Sarian would talk about this stuff, but she was like, in the 1930s, there was a serial killer called the Cleveland Torso Killer, and he's also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, but she was calling him the Cleveland Torso Killer, And this is a case that I've never talked about before on Black Box Online Radio. I've definitely had requests to talk about the Cleveland Torso Killer, and on the Tuesday show this year, I've been using it as a type of revolving door of subjects. Different episodes have been coming out for the Tuesday show. I'm really going to have to do that at some point, because, as you guys know, there is an enormous story there, but that is a set of dismembering homicides, where the victims' bodies were dismembered, hence the name The Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, and even Larry Harnish talks about this in his live streams. Yes, the authorities did investigate the possible connection between the Black Dahlia and the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. It's in the reports, it's in the files. They did. And they ultimately determined that, no, it's not the same killer. And I'm not surprised at all that they would conduct that investigation, because the authorities are human beings, and they explore these types of connections. And a very clear example of this is, there was the famous Golden State Killer, right? Joseph D'Angelo. And he committed a terrible reign of terror in California from 1973 to 1986, maybe into the 1990s. We don't really know. Maybe even before. But there are some very strong similarities between the Golden State Killer and a criminal in Australia named Mr. Cruel. And I have an episode about him as well. And the authorities actually looked at a possible link between Joseph D'Angelo and Mr. Cruel. They're looking at this guy from California and trying to see if he's this Australian offender named Mr. Cruel, and ultimately they determined that they were different people. But people pay attention to this stuff. They pay attention to the similarities between and among different crimes all around the world. They've been doing this since the 1800s. Say, for example, when Jack the Ripper started operating in England in 1888, people in Texas were thinking, hey, that sounds like the Midnight Assassin who killed people in 1884 and 1885. The Midnight Assassin is also known as the Servant Girl Annihilator. So people are very well aware of this. But ultimately, it seems that the authorities came to the conclusion that it was not the same person. And to be clear, I don't think that Red Manley did it. I have so many doubts about George Hodel as a suspect. And I mean, I'm going to keep going with Black Dahlia Red Rose, because that's the book that's truly going to explore Leslie Dillon as a suspect. As of now, my top suspect might be Walter Bailey for the Black Dahlia murder, and I'm simply waiting to learn more about him, because as I understand, he's going to be discussed in the new Larry Harnish book. But who knows when that's coming out? We'll have to wait and see. I'm also hoping to do a much larger episode on Carl Balsiger as a Black Dahlia suspect and see what I can find, see what I can uncover about him. He is the suspect that is mentioned in Sisters in Death, and that's the book by Eli Frankel that claims that the Black Dahlia Avenger was also the prairie heiress hunter from Kansas City. So I'm going to see what I can find about him as well. And the final thing that I will leave you with is, maybe on week 2 or week 3 of Dahlia Thursday, I was already sharing something about how Elizabeth Short did not get the name the Black Dahlia from the media. It was something that she had while she was alive in 1946, and it was a response to the movie The Blue Dahlia, and she had her black hair that looked like a dahlia flower. And in Bailey Sarian's video, she even stated that Elizabeth Short received this nickname from the media post-mortem. That is most likely untrue. I mean, it's shared in countless places online that that's what happened, but it's my understanding that she got that nickname while she was still alive. But one thing that Bailey was completely right about was, they also share these details, such as Elizabeth Short was called the Black Dahlia because of her black hair and the fact that she liked to wear black underwear. And one time where I completely agree with Bailey Sarian was, she's like, this is just an attempt to sexualize a victim. This is just the media taking a story, and then they're trying to focus on certain details to sexualize the case for more attention. And I'm like, yes, completely. That's hitting the nail on the head. And as you can tell, I'm not the biggest fan of Bailey Sarian, but I think she was on point with that one. And I really think that this case just focuses on so many, stories about Elizabeth Short. He's saying stuff like she was a prostitute, she had malformed genitalia, so she liked to only work as a prostitute by giving oral sex. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second. How do we really know about this stuff? These just sound like a bunch of wild stories. And it's also people trying to make a story more outrageous than it actually is. And it's been happening since week 1 here on Dahlia Thursday, and it's been happening for more than 50 years, more than 60 years, 70 years at this point. So unfortunately, a lot of people are going to try and zone in on particular details to expand the story to an audience using bizarre sexual allegations. And that is bad. And if you have anything to say about the Black Dahlia, I would love to read it in the comments section down below. You guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned Dahan. And there's also Black Box Online Radio on Facebook. There's a separate page as well. And blackboxned88 on Instagram. And I use these pages to release shorts and reels. You guys already know that, Monday through Friday. And this show comes to you Monday through Friday talking about the Zodiac Killer, the disappearance of Moore Murray, Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia, and D.B. Cooper. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. This show is available for free downloads anywhere you get your podcasts, including Black Box Online Radio, Spotify, and Apple Podcast page, using the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. And of course, the images that you see going by on the screen are archived at True Crime Designs on Facebook, True Crime Designs, and please feel free to follow that page too. And I will see you tomorrow for a new episode about D.B. Cooper. Until next time.